The views, thoughts, and opinions expressed in the podcast belong solely to the hosts and not the host's past, present, or future employers. Hello, everybody. This is Bryan from Breaking Down Security. This week is part 2 with Tanya Janca on security champions and API security. Last week we did a little discussion on secure coding practices and had a great discussion about application security with Tanya, and talked about her book a little bit. This week we're going to talk about security champions. We're going to talk about how to get and find people that will advocate for security in your organization. Sometimes they can be lateral to you. Most often, and the more I would argue, the more powerful ones are folks in your org that you don't necessarily report to, but are in a position to help carry your message further, to amplify your message up, in this case, to the org in ways that helps people in management where they're thinking more organizationally or strategically, understand the ramifications of a vulnerability or what have you. We also talk about making, if it's possible, impactful demos that really get the point across as to how easy it is to do something. One of the last things we have talked about also during this would be risk acceptance and process. What she does in this case to make sure that orgs understand that, because yes, there may be a legitimate reason why an org would accept a risk. And if your process is cumbersome, people won't use the risk acceptance criteria or the process and just, go ahead and do whatever it is they want to do, be damned to the risks. So this is very interesting discussion from somebody who obviously has had to accept some risks or has had to query leadership to get them to accept risks. So I hope everyone enjoys this week's show. We'll be back next week. Ms. Berlin, Mr. Boettcher, and myself will be on talking about Sysmon, logging and monitoring, and how to use Sysmon in your organization to increase exposure of potential bad IOCs. There are no good IOCs, I don't think, but it will help you find IOCs in your environment. So hope you have a great week, and we'll talk soon. So I'm going to try to turn this into a question, but Dewey Oxberg, one of our stream chatters here, said, security person here, when I ask, and I'm assuming when he asks about testing, corporate always fights me and kicks up a riot, testing or documentation, making it, their comment or management's content is making it easier for business, needing champions at the senior level to corporate know you're wrong. We'll talk about the champion stuff in a minute, but what should Dewey and should Dewey find people in the organization that care, like maybe an SDM or other SDEs in this case, to help them understand how it's in their best interest to have this documentation? Because we've talked about shift left forever, and I don't even know if that's really a thing anymore where people actually believe it's a thing. But having that documentation seems like a good idea. But I mean, what for Dewey? How do we get champions at senior or core, senior levels like SDMs and those folks to get that, understand that? How do we use like time, money, and resources kind of arguments where it's like it's actually cheaper for you to have documentation in the long run?
So I usually start with the carrot and end with a stick. So I'll start with trying to show them, like, actually, there's a great return on investment. Let me show you. Oh. So my first AppSec program, I was like, listen, 26% of our incidents in the past 6 months were due to insecure apps. But they were the most expensive and humiliating incidents. And it cost us this much. For half that price, I can launch a very simple AppSec program that will definitely prevent those types of incidents from ever happening again. And when I spread it all out like that and showed them the numbers, they approved it on the spot. Nice. So that was good. But sometimes I've worked at places where the dev team is telling me like, no, we can't do that. That's too much work. Like, it's not worth it. No. So I created like a little exploit site. I wanted them to basically make our site not frameable, because there was like threat models based on our business model where I thought people might try to frame us. And they're like, oh no, that would never happen. So I created like this little overlay and I made it yellow because you have to, JavaScript's invisible, right? So I made it yellow, and then I'm clearly like stealing the user credentials. So I emailed the team that's been objecting and I was like, please click on this link, you've won an iPad. And they're like, Tanya, we know this is from you and we know we didn't win an iPad. I'm like, that's true, but we have 20,000 employees. And if you look at the stats, you know, at least 10 of them will click. So click on this link. And so they click on it and they're like, wow, that looks just like prod. I'm like, it is prod. And they're like, well, it's bright yellow, Tanya. Anyone would notice. I'm like, do you understand how long it took me to make this JavaScript yellow so that you could see it? And they're like, oh. I'm like, this took like half of an afternoon, like basically like an hour and 45 minutes in between meetings to make this demo for you, send it to you, and get one of you to click. Imagine what an actual malicious actor who knows what the heck they're doing could do. And so sometimes I'll make exploits. But the third thing that I'll do, which is like really up there, I'll make a risk acceptance sign-off sheet. And so I'll write up all the risks of the things they've refused to fix or refused to address that have been stressing me out and keeping me up at night. And I send it to like the big bosses and I'm like, please sign off that you accept this risk. And then they always say, no, I'm not signing. This is awful. And then I explain, well, I've informed you of it. And no one's letting me fix these things. No one's giving me buy-in. No one's giving me time. There's 1,000 excuses. And so I'm unable to do my job. And I'm unwilling to carry the responsibility when I don't have the authority, and you have the authority. And they're like, well, I'm not signing it. I'm like, it doesn't matter because I've written you in writing. And when bad things happen, because they will, it will be very clear that you were made aware of this risk. And they're just like, oh, that's dirty pool. I'm like, I know.
By the way, I've CC'd legal on this as well, so they'll know. And, you know, yeah.
But you're really pushing at that point. So then I got permission to fix the things. And then if that failed, so at one place, all of those things failed. And so I resigned. And they're like, wow. Why are you resigning? I'm like, because you won't let me do my job. And so the big boss took me aside and was like, I need you to be honest with me. Is someone harassing you? I'm like, no, honestly, my team's so nice and I'm going to miss them so much. It breaks my heart to leave. There's so many cool people. And there's like this crew that I go to the gym with at lunch. They're so nice. And even though I'm a total wimp, they still let me work out with them. And then there's these people. I'm like, I love working here, but I can't work at a place that doesn't take security seriously because we are going to be in the news for bad reasons very soon. And I can't have my name on that crap. You're going to ruin my career. So I got to go. And they're like, okay, so at least you're not being harassed, because we're like, she seems really happy. Why is she leaving? I'm like, I am happy. I love it here.
You're the reason I'm leaving. Yeah.
I know. And they're like, oh, so it's not anything important. I was like, face palm, double face palm.
Yeah.
They've been in the news over and over again. They've had like 5 breaches since I left, and I will not name them, but it has been a disaster.
Okay. I'm trying to, okay. I'm not trying to guess you. I'm not trying to guess yours. I'm just trying to make sure that it's not me.
No, it's not you.
Okay. Whew. Okay. So we talked about, it sounds like, you know, input sanitization is still important. Doing injection kind of attacks on APIs is a thing. So, you know, make sure you're only collecting and you know, keeping that information. So what are some of the other major items in API security that we should be looking at?
Okay. So I have a list, and also I have a free online course because that's how I roll. So if you want to take the free online course, go to community.wehackpurple.com. You join the community, which is totally free. We don't sell anything in the community. And then once you're in, go to the left, and then there's courses, and take the mini API security course. And it'll cover all of this and more. Okay, so the first thing you gotta do, Bryan, is take inventory. You need a list of all of your APIs. If you don't know about them, you can't protect them. If you don't know they exist, they probably haven't had a test. They probably haven't had their code reviewed, right? So make a list. Any of them that are above version 1 point something, so if it's version 2 or version 3, something like that, go and check to see that the old version's turned off. So it doesn't happen very often, but a lot of pen testers have told me maybe 1 in 20 engagements, there'll be one old version of an API that they forgot to turn off. And it is usually wildly insecure. Because software does not use it. And so an API that's left running when they've been working on the new one, those dependencies are getting older. It's not good. So turn off all the old ones that should have been turned off that you might have missed.
Right.
All APIs that face the internet, so if they're accessible from the internet, even if you're like, oh, there's a GUI in front, no one should know to talk to it. Just assume someone like me is going to be a jerk and try to talk to it. I think they should all be behind an API gateway. So an API gateway does a bunch of things, but the 3 main things are: 1, no one can talk to it unless you go through there. So you have to do it. You authenticate and then you authorize. So who the heck are you? And then so that's authentication, then authorization. Like, should you be here? Should you be allowed to call this? And then there's usually really cool features in an API gateway. And there's 2 I want you to turn on. One's throttling. So it means like slowing down over time. And the other is resource quotas. And what that does is it helps you with bots and brute force attacks. So it's like, hey, buddy, go away. Like, you've asked 400 times from the same IP address. You're not coming back here. Or like, you've asked once every 5 minutes for like 5 hours. Back off. And that can save you money and cloud bills and protect you against brute force attacks. So those are good things.
So are API gateways usually added to like a WAF or something like that? Do they come integrated with that, or is it a separate application or like a load balancer or something like that?
So I would generally put it on a load balancer, like on the exterior where you would put a WAF. It's a really good point that a WAF and an API gateway could be. So I know there's some companies, I think Silt does this, and a PG or APIG, however you're supposed to say their name. But there's a few out there where they make an API WAF and an API gateway. So they must click in together. They must.
I didn't know if the API gateways and WAFs were one and the same or different. I guess it would depend on, you said, your whether or not you have a WAF like that. Might be a smart question to ask if you're looking into WAFs. Does this also include, gateway APIs or the ability to rate limit or throttle or what have you?
Yeah, so I think a WAF can probably rate limit and throttle, but as to if it does authentication and authorization for you, I don't know. And that's the main function of the API gateway, just like any gate. Right? The idea is like, I'm letting you in or I'm not. You can go away.
Right.
But a WAF, specifically for anyone who doesn't know who's listening, web application firewall, the idea is that all the input that's going to your API or to your app, each piece of input, it looks at it, it runs it through a bunch of regex, which is regular expressions, and it's like, does that input look dangerous or not? And if it looks dangerous, it blocks it. And if it looks normal, it lets it through. And so different functionality, but combining it seems basically brilliant. So yeah, I don't know though if they sell it as one unit.
Well, if somebody out there has a WAF and they don't suck and they're like you, I really worry about bringing sponsors on because a lot of it's snake oil. So if there's a WAF out there that doesn't suck, let me know and maybe we can reach out and have some meaningful discussions with those folks. So,
oh my gosh.
YTT is saying all cloud providers and CDNs have API gateways. So YTT, does that also include authorization and authentication?
Yeah, it should.
She'll hit us up.
Yeah.
Cool.
There's I have more stuff if you.
Yes, please. No, please.
Tolerate more stuff.
Yeah.
So like a few things that are important for web apps, but that are almost always forgotten in APIs are logging, monitoring, and alerting. So for some reason, they're like, oh, it's just a little API. All it does is return like a postal code. Who cares? And it's like, actually, I really, really, really care. And so making it log and monitor, and then having it alert, like having an app be able to call for help. Like, listen, I've reached the global exception handler because all my other exception handling did not pass. Like, something's wrong, please come help.
Right.
Or like someone's clearly trying to brute force us, and for whatever reason, it hasn't been blocked somewhere else. Like, this is a problem. So there's certain things where it's like, that's obviously not good. And just logging so that me as the incident responder has something to investigate, because it really sucks to investigate an attack on a web app or an API where there's no logs. I'm like, what do you think I'm going to investigate, buddy? How am I supposed to know? Right. There's no logs. Right. So making sure you're doing that. And also, so if you're hosting on platform as a service, this doesn't apply to you. But if you're hosting on a virtual machine, and maybe depending upon the container setup, but usually it's older stuff that's been in prod a while and it's on-prem, blocking or turning off or disabling all the HTTP methods that you're not using. So HTTP methods generally in a web app are get and put. So go get me that postal code, or like, I want to submit this form, so I'm going to post the data from this form. But there's actually like a ton of things. So there's like delete, update, trace, head, etc. As an annoying pen tester, I'm going to send a get request. I'm like, cool, that worked. I'm going to send a post request. I'm like, awesome. I'm like, I'm going to send a delete request. Did it listen to me? Did it respond with something cool? What happened? And I'm just going to keep sending stupid things to see if it sticks. So if you could disable all of those that you're not using, that reduces your attack surface greatly. And I think I was listening to your podcast before at least once where you had a guest on that was talking about reducing attack surface. It was like a few years ago, and you had this woman on, and she went on and on about it. And since then, I've been like very inspired by her. But she worked at Google, and I don't remember her name, but she was awesome. Anyway, I digress. So disabling those is really good, because then you've just like reduced the amount of like ways that people can harm you. You and I, before we started like this stream, we talked a little bit about service mesh. And so every cloud provider will offer you a service mesh, and then there's some agnostic service mesh, which means it works with any cloud. But a service mesh is a layer of infrastructure, and it will manage your API calls and encrypt them end to end. So what this means is you don't have to change a bunch of your code. That's awesome. I don't want to change a bunch of my code every time the security team does something. I have stuff to do. I'm a dev. But what it also does is it makes sure that all of your calls arrive. So TCP/IP was so totally not designed to have like 10 trillion different API calls every second. And so if you have like 4 APIs or 5 APIs, you don't need a service mesh, you'll be fine. But if you have a microservice architecture, so you have tons of little tiny APIs, little tiny web services, just doing little tiny things for you, each one of those calls needs to be directed. And TCP/IP was like, yeah, Tanya's going to send a message to Bryan. We'll get it to him when we're ready. It was not supposed to be like Tanya's going to send 45,000 different calls as Bryan's sending 45,000 other calls in response. That's not what it was meant to do. And so what it does is it speeds everything up. It encrypts it end to end, which I think is awesome. And it manages that stuff. So it makes sure that your calls actually arrive and they don't kind of crash or bang into each other. So if you are doing a lot of APIs and you're noticing a lot of latency and things are slowing down and sometimes things don't quite respond, you should consider getting a service mesh. I do not work for anywhere that sells a service mesh, but there's a whole bunch of really awesome ones out there. I'm not going to recommend specific products, but basically, like if you've heard of it, it's probably good. If it comes from your cloud provider, it's probably good, but only for your cloud provider. So if you're doing multi-cloud, you probably want an agnostic one rather than managing 2 or 3 different service mesh, but it's up to you.
Okay.
I give advice on this a lot.
That's a good question. So if I'm a security person and I've never heard of a service mesh and the company wants to buy one, is it something that's like, is that how big a deal is that to have that? Or are there any questions that security people should be asking for on a service mesh? It's like maybe logging and secure, is it using all of the best ciphers? I don't know. What kind of questions would you ask if somebody's trying to purchase a service mesh?
I would really want to know that it was compatible with every type of technology and hosting that I'm doing. So I would want to know. So for instance, so people will say, oh, we're doing REST. I'm like, that's great. But that's like an architecture. That's not a protocol. So basically there's SOAP, which is old school APIs. And then there's Swagger Open API. So it was called Swagger for version 1.0, and then they decided that it would be really awesome to change the name to the Open API protocol for version 2. So people get confused, but they're sort of the same thing, if you know what I mean. Like it's an evolution of the same idea.
Okay.
And if you are using SOAP, you want to make sure that SOAP is supported because it's older. Right. And that means that your APIs might be a little elderly. And that's okay, but you want to make sure that your technology is supported. Because if you get one, it's like, oh, we only handle Swagger and Open API. It's like, well, what about these guys? They still need some management. Right. And then you also want to make sure it works with whoever you're hosting. So if you're doing stuff on premises, there's some that do and do not work on premises. If you're doing like hybrid, a ton of places do that where they still have like 1/3 of their old legacy stuff that they just can't quite get rid of, and that's on-prem, and then they have all their fancy cool new stuff, and that is in the cloud somewhere or in multiple clouds because they've acquired a bunch of different startups or whatever. Ideally you're not managing 7 different service meshes. That sucks.
Right.
So then you would probably want to get something that would be agnostic so that you're just managing one tool. So make sure it's compatible with what you're using and where you're hosting. That's what I would and then price. Like that's important. Price is important. And so if you already have a certain cloud provider and all your stuff is in that cloud, your service mesh is probably going to be nicely priced for you because they want you to live in their little ecosystem.
Right. Okay. Very good. Yeah. I wasn't exactly sure what a service mesh was. So that's good information, from my side. So logging, so Dewey Oxberg is he says he's a bit grumpy. He says logging, tell that to the geniuses who shut off Splunk and didn't tell us what was being replaced with. Hint, no logging took its place. Argument, too much money. And I'm just like, table flip. You definitely need to have some kind of logging in place. If it seems like, turning off your Splunk would be kind of a major deal. And somebody should know about that. There should be some emails that come out about that, but, I feel your pain, Dewey. I do feel your pain. So
you still can log and you still can, like, you're writing custom apps. You're making something out of nothing every day. You're a software developer. You're amazing.
Right.
You can make it alert yourself. So like when I was a custom dev, like I worked in the Canadian government a long time. And I remember I was like, well, it's nice that there's logs, but I'd really like it if my app would tell me like, help, I'm dying. And so we made custom things. So like for an example that's really easy is, so you often have a global exception handler. And what that means is all the other error handling has totally failed. We're completely off the rails and we don't know why. And then this is like the final, like,
we were talking about global exceptions, and it's like the equivalent of a PC load letter for faxes, I believe, right? You don't know exactly what it does, but it's a larger bit there.
No, imagine you're watching like an acrobat perform in a circus, like Cirque du Soleil. Right. And you know how there's that big net underneath them? They theoretically should never, ever need the net. They never fall into the net, right? But maybe once a year, someone does, and they're so happy because the person does not die, the audience is not traumatized, life is good. Yeah. If you fall into the global exception handler, it means every other thing in your app has gone wrong. And then that's when it should send an alert, like an email directly to the dev leader or to the dev team that's like, global exception handler alert happened. Like, your app needs help. Something's bad. It's crashing. Something's going down. Like at the very least that. And so you can kind of just like start with that. I have some guidance in the courses in We Hack Purple about exactly what to log and exactly when to alert. But I'll talk to you for 2 more hours if we go into that. And I still have a few more API things I want to say.
Okay. So it's hard, I think, though. You're talking about logging exceptions or logging areas in your API. It's hard to have those places in the API where those things would occur. Sometimes there's an if statement or something like that. But finding those insertion points to be able to go, okay, this is what's wrong, and this is why this went wrong. Depending on the complexity of the API, you could have several hundred of these things, I would imagine. So let me see. Dewey says, a global handler in the event a pen tester is attacking my app just to warn me about something wonky is going on. I could ponder. You might see something like that, or you might just, have logs where, the logs might be coming from your service mesh where it's like, somebody's trying to decrypt my message, or it didn't come in right, or it didn't authenticate properly because it was sent, in some way. So you're absolutely right, Dewey. So, all right, let's continue on. We had service meshes, we had API gateways, we've done input validation,
inventory, turned off old ones.
Inventory, right?
Throttling and resource quotas. So a thing I like to remind devs of is like, you should still follow all the secure coding best practices. You should. If for some reason you're not using an API gateway, make sure you authenticate, then authorize after. Never authorize, then authenticate. That's very bad.
Yep.
But a big thing for APIs specifically is don't give verbose error messages, because a human shouldn't get them. So the first time I was pen testing APIs, I'm not going to name the company, but basically they're Canadian, and we're very Canadian about it. So the stereotype exists for a reason. And so I sent, a good request, and a good thing came back. So I sent a malicious request, right? And then it sent back like this and this. And I was like, you just helped me make a way better attack. Dude, why are you being, he's like, well, we got to write nice messages. I'm like, no, a human will never receive these messages. This isn't a user of your application. This is a computer talking to another computer. You don't need to be polite. I mean, you don't want to write, hey, buddy, go to hell. That would be rude. That's not necessary. Right. But you should be sending a message. Bad input, and that's it. And maybe we could troubleshoot by third-party partners. So a bunch of different companies that were partnered with us, essentially. So they would call our service, and we would go off and do things, and then they would sell that off to their customers. And so I'm like, listen, they can call our help desk. They know us. They're our partner, right? But we don't, like, anyone that is a person that's reading that error message with their eyes is a malicious actor, or your QA team, or your pen tester. And so don't be polite. And they gave me all the details so that I could just smash them. And so I got them to change, but they were really concerned because Canadians, like, we value politeness. And so they're just like, are you sure that's not a bad thing? I'm like, no one's going to be offended. It is totally fine. And so it's funny because it fits the stereotype, but it's also actually a really important thing. Whenever we're giving a message, whether it's an API or a web app, you never want to give information that could specifically help an attacker. So if someone puts in something and the format is bad, you don't need to mirror the bad thing that they did to the screen. You don't need to say single quote, open angular bracket, script, close angular bracket, blah, blah, is not a proper name. Because then you're showing them, hey, I'm going to reflect your input to the screen. Want to try some cross-site scripting? Right? Yep. So instead just say improper input. What we're looking for is, characters, or what we're looking for is this. You don't need to outline the things that are bad. Just outline what you are expecting. Usernames are to be 20 or like 6 characters to 120 characters, and we're expecting letters and numbers only. Thank you. Right. That's enough for a normal person who's not an attacker. But I've seen it where they're like, please don't put in angular brackets or single quotes. Well, obviously, I'm going to immediately put in those. That sounds great. Yeah. Thank you for the hint.
Yeah. No numbers are allowed in this field. Okay. So what I'm hearing is put numbers in. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I have a, well, it's not a meme. It's actually a real error message that I got when I tried to set a password back in the day. The authentication was used for mainframes. So they were like really, really specific about what you could and could not put in this 8-character field, including like certain special characters couldn't be used or whatever. And it's like, wow, that's hot mess right there. So, but yeah, it's, you may have legacy technology that, that precludes you from being able to put in complicated passwords too. So, there's definitely some technology issues there, especially if you're in like financials or something like that, where you're still dealing with those. So, cool. All right.
I have one last thing. Can I just add one more?
Sure. Yeah.
My top 10 API talk, I actually, like, in the second slide, I'm like, I lied, there's way more than 10, but top 10 sounds cool. Sorry, not sorry. So there's not actually 10, but so this applies to web apps too, or any software. Follow a secure system development lifecycle. Like if you're doing Agile, you're doing DevOps, you're doing waterfall, I don't care which one you want to do, but if you're going to gather requirements, add some security requirements, right? If you're going to do design, there's so many things you could do during the design phase. Like just having a simple 30-minute conversation with the security person, like a casual conversation to threat model. I had this really awesome person named Adam Shostak on my podcast, and he gave me just 4 questions. He's like, you can just ask these 4 questions. Any dev should know the answer. And then you have a basic threat model. So like, what are we doing? What could go wrong? What are we going to do about it? And then the last question is, did we do a good job? Because quite frankly, Bryan, sometimes they're like, oh, I'm going to manage that, right? I'm like, that means nothing. That means you're going to do nothing. That can't be the answer to 100% of the threats we find. Because I've had meetings like that where they're like, we'll just manage that risk. And I'm like, so you've just told me 10 in a row, you're going to do nothing. Like, so then that's why he added the question, did we do a good job? But even just having a 30-minute conversation where you ask those questions, even if you only identify half of the threats, that's awesome. You just identified half of the threats and before you had 0, right? And so if you could just do at least 1 or 2 security activities every time you create a new API, you will create an infinitely better API. Like if you do a dynamic scan, you do a static analysis of the code, you make sure your dependencies are not literally flaming on fire, full of little exploits. Like there's so many things that you could do to just make it not suck. And so a secure system development lifecycle, you don't have to do like the 400 things that are possible, but if you could do just one thing, that's infinitely better than doing nothing. So if people listen to one thing today, please add 1 security activity and I'll be happy with you.
Yeah. Just that's really great. I mean, that's excellent feedback. It's just that's like the ultimate shift left though, isn't it? Cause you're creating those baselines, you're asking those questions even before you get started. So that's really awesome. So, oh wow. Okay. I'm actually technically still at work, so I have a meeting in about 9 minutes, but,
okay.
We can definitely come back at some point in the future and talk about the security champions because I'm very interested in talking about that. We talked a little bit about that today because I could definitely see like system architects or, leveraging those folks to be able to get involved with that. So for the folks who showed up a little late, how would they get a hold of you if they wanted to talk more about API security or, maybe they need some mentoring? I remember Mentoring Mondays is still a thing on Twitter. So how would they get a hold of you if they wanted to reach out and talk to you?
Okay, so I am a huge fan of the Twitter social media platform. I tweet a lot and I love reading other people's tweets. So I'm on there and I actually answer messages in a reasonable amount of time. So am I going to answer you the same day? I'm definitely not. But will I answer you sometime that week? Most likely, yes. So Twitter, I'm at SheHacksPurple. I also have a website, shehackspurple.ca. And so you can join my newsletter. You can read my zillions of blogs. You can watch my videos. You can see all my talks. You can look at pictures of me because people said I should put those up there. And you can email me directly at tanya@shehackspurple.ca. Every Monday on Twitter, thank you for mentioning this. So this is like kind of a community project that I've been doing for many years now. I do Cyber Mentoring Monday. So hashtag, all one word, Cyber Mentoring Monday. Every Monday I tweet the hashtag, but now many people across our industry tweet it. And some of them are offering, like, I have 20 years experience doing GRC, and I'm willing to take on a new person, or I'm willing to have a virtual coffee with someone. People will recommend books. People will be like, oh, join our community, or like, this course changed my life, and I'll loan you a book. And basically it's our industry coming together and welcoming newcomers and trying to help them find professional mentors. Not every single person finds a mentor. And sometimes people have to ask a bunch of times before they find the right person, because just because someone's cool doesn't mean they're the right mentor for you.
Right.
But sometimes you meet friends, and this has resulted in some people starting companies together, some people getting introduced to people who hired them, long-term friendships, and so many wonderful positive things. And so to every person who's used that hashtag and like helped someone, thank you. It's so amazing to see people pair off. And if you're going to do it, make sure your direct messages are turned on so people can message you, because it's really annoying for people who are like, I'm going to help you. And then they try to message you and your DMs are closed and they're like, come on.
Yep.
You can also join my online community. You just go to community.wehackpurple.com. I hang out there. We have free event. We have a lot there. We have those that give kind of product demos of like weird new things they invented. And we have, I don't know, like just nice conversations. Tomorrow I'm actually having an event where we're just going to share sci-fi book recommendations with each other. And we do that every 6 months because I just love sci-fi so much. And I'll be like, oh my gosh, I read that series you recommended, blah, blah, blah. And like, we just all catch up. And all of it's free thanks to Bright Security. And so, yeah, please find me in one of those places and let's connect. I would love that.
Okay. All right. Well, I like I said, I've got to go in about 5 minutes, but thank you again, Tanya, for joining me here on the Twitch broadcast, and we'll pass along all that information. I've posted it up into Stream Chat for everybody to digest, and yeah, thank you again for coming, and you're always welcome to come back on. We'll definitely come back on and talk about the mentoring stuff potentially and the champion stuff, because that's like you said with the community college wanting to use your books, that's paving the way for future people doing things properly. And I think that's very important. So cool.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that's it for our stream. I will put this out as an audio podcast as well, but yeah, thank you all for coming, and yeah, we'll talk again soon. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Okay, that was it for this week on our show. We'd like to thank Tanya for coming on and talking about API security and security champions, ways that you can hopefully improve your organization's communication about risk, and also, communicate with your developers on risk and making impactful decisions about risk. And, if all of that doesn't work, you always have the risk acceptance policies, and you can make that happen. So hope you got some value out of that. I would suggest going to Amazon and getting Alice and Bob Learn Application Security, the book that Tanya wrote. And you can also go to wehackpurple.com for a lot of training that she has available on her site. And really excellent AppSec related items, and also some developer focused content as well. You can go check that out. You can follow her on Twitter as well at SheHacksPurple. You can follow us on Twitter at BrakeSec. The BrakeSec broadcast and podcast are available on a number of different podcast platforms. If it's not on your favorite one, please let us know and we'll do our best to get it on there. Also, 5-star reviews on Apple Podcasts and other places would go a long way to helping us out getting that on. If you are interested in checking out 180 some hours of audio and video content, a lot of it is me. You can go to our our Twitch stream at twitch.tv/BrakeSec. A quick subscription will get you enough CPEs to last you for a year or better. So we do a lot of try hack me walkthroughs and hack the box stuff, and just content that doesn't make it to the podcast is on there as well. Somebody correctly called me out the fact that the podcast itself is free. You can go and get it, but there is a freemium model where if you wanted additional content, the Twitch stream has additional audio that may or may not make it on to future podcasts. So I do appreciate being corrected in that respect. So please feel free to check out our Twitch stream if you'd like to. Also, InfoSister, you can find her, Amanda Berlin, you can find her at InfoSister on Twitter. Brian Boettcher is at BoettcherPwned. I'm at Bryan Break. And we still have tickets for InfoSec Campout 2022. You can go to infoseccampout.com and check that out if you're interested in a backyard camping experience with some security folk in the Pacific Northwest. Looking forward to having that at the end of August. And that's it for Breaking Down Security this week. Take care of yourselves. Be kind to one another. And be kind to yourself, because as we're fond of saying here, you're the only you have. We'll talk to you soon.